Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. In a major rebuke to President Obama, the Supreme Court this week unanimously overturned his recess appointments to the National Labor Relations Board, ruling that he overstepped his authority when he declared the Senate in recess and installed his nominees in 2012. The decision came a day after House Speaker John Boehner announced he would move forward with a lawsuit against Mr. Obama for abusing his executive powers, accusing the president of, quote, ignoring some statutes completely, selectively enforcing others, and at times creating laws of his own. Joining the panel this week, Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger, Washington columnist Kim Strassel, and editorial board member Joe Rago. So, Joe, let's start with this recess appointment decision. Very rare for a president to lose 9-0 on a case like this, including the liberals and including two of his own appointees. How big was this decision?
This was pretty big. Under any conceivable theory of constitutional interpretation, these recess appointments were thrown out. So in terms of vindicating the Constitution's separation of powers, this is a very important decision.
It was basically saying that the president had decided unilaterally to say, I think the Senate is in session, therefore I will appoint these, even if the Senate says itself, it is not in session.
Right. The Senate was conducting something called pro forma sessions precisely to prevent the White House from making recess appointments. And he said, oh, no, this counts as a recess. I'm going to go ahead and make these appointments anyway.
Quick detail, Justice Breyer even sort of arbitrarily said a break in the session should be at least 10 days. The one Obama was citing was 3 days, and the liberal justices simply couldn't swallow the idea that that's a real recess.
What's the practical implication of this for the president's power to make recess appointees? The whole point of which was to say, all right, Congress, back in the founding days, took 2-3 months to get to Washington, so you have to be able to fill the government. But that need has really been obviated now with mass transportation.
The original purpose of the exception to the advice and consent power has kind of disappeared over time. It leaves the White House weaker. With this decision, the case is called Noel Canning. The Senate kind of has a guide to preventing recess appointments if that's really what they want to do. And these powers are sort of going to always be in tension. The Senate is strengthened against the executive.
So if the Senate is controlled by the opposite party of the president, it can basically stop now all recess appointments except for every 2 years when Congress finally gavels itself closed. So President Obama has weakened all of his successors.
And this was a 9-0 opinion, but there was a 4-member concurrence by the 4 conservative justices, and they would have weakened the powers still further, just to that between formal sessions gap that you were talking about. So the recklessness of these recess appointments really potentially could have weakened this power much more than the court actually went through with.
Okay, Kim, let's talk about this lawsuit by John Boehner against the president. This is extraordinary. We haven't had such a thing before, and he's going to get a full vote of the House to proceed. Why is John Boehner doing this?
Well, we've never had this before, Paul, because we haven't had to have this before. In the past, when you've had presidents overreach, step on congressional powers, Congress itself has stood up and sort of slapped presidents down, and that's often served to make presidents think very hard about doing something like this. This Senate, Democratic Senate, has invited the president to do things like these recess appointments, and so the White House has felt very emboldened. So John Boehner feels that this is one of the only options to trying to stop the president doing this. He's going to go ahead, and this is aimed at everything from the president unilaterally changing Obamacare, changing immigration law, creating laws or regulations that should, in theory, be done by Congress.
And also doing something that's called suspending the laws, which means essentially refusing to enforce certain elements of the statute on immigration, for example, saying that the Controlled Substances Act on marijuana, I'm just not going to enforce it in a couple of states, that sort of thing. So they want him to obey the law.
Yes, and this is, now the curious question will be, of course, whether or not this is unprecedented. So the question is whether or not John Boehner, the House, will have standing to bring such a suit. That's a very intricate legal discussion a lot of people have been having out there. And so we'll see if that manages to happen. And this is also, Paul, it's going to take a long time. What's interesting about this is that John Boehner is doing this really in the interest of future Congresses, because this litigation will take a while to become ripe. And you know, this may not even happen while President Obama is still in the White House.
Dan, is it a good idea for Congress to go to the courts to seek essentially adjudication here, or should it be asserting its own power, as Kim suggested they have in the past, say the power of the purse and other
this
police,
raises
the president?
This raises the constitutional issue at the heart of this. Basically, what the president has been doing is stripping Congress of its legislative powers. And what John Boehner is going to do is cite Article 1 of the Constitution. You can't be more serious. The first sentence of the Constitution reads, "We the people." The second sentence says, "Powers to legislate shall be vested in Congress." Could not be clearer. Right. And so the courts, I think what John Boehner is saying, are going to have to arbitrate this incredible tension that Obama has created between the executive and the Congress.
And there was another case this week, Joe. The EPA was slapped down on its carbon regulation.
That's right, and for kind of the same reasons. The executive branch can't make its own laws. And just to your earlier question to Dan, Obama has really inflamed the situation here, and this is really the last recourse left for Congress.